Ladies and gentlemen and Amiga lovers, old and young, well done. You have made it to the final level, and I'm absolutely delighted that for your end of level boss, we have got someone who's been in the game industry for 30 years, working on titles as diverse as Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince to Battle Engine Aquila, but we are at an Amiga event. So we are especially interested in his time at Bullfrog, where he worked on such memorable titles as Powermonger, Populist and Syndicate. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause, Alex Trowers. Okay, Alex, I suppose the sensible thing to do would be to start and say, how did you get your foot in the door at Bullfrog?
Well, at the risk of this one story, taking up the entire time I've got allotted.
Oh, okay.
The short answer is blind luck. The longer and more entertaining answer is that, so I bombed out of school not knowing anything. I had no qualifications and no nothing. I ended up on a YTS scheme, for those of you old enough to remember what they were.
Yeah.
So I ended up on one of those things, and the one good thing to come out of that was they did work experience placements. And I ended up at this really nice coding company, learning to program in C. It was fantastic, great fun. But I also met Sean Cooper on the bus, because he used to live in, we were all Guildford sort of based, but he used to live in Farnham with me, and so I knew him from the bus. I knew Glenn and Kevin, Corpus and Donkin, from the local game shop, and so we used to kind of hang out there, so I knew some of the guys, and I never realised that being a game developer was something you could do. I used to bunk off school with my mate to play Populous. And I loved it. I thought it was great, and I didn't ever realise that this was a career option. But then chatting to Sean on the bus, he said, why don't you come in and speak to us? We're always looking for people. So I came in, I sat down, I had an interview with Peter, and that all went really, really well. They were looking for someone. And at the end of the interview, he goes, so when could you start? And I said, oh, that's fantastic. Give me 2 weeks to sort it out with the guys that I'm currently with, because I don't want to mess them around. And he goes, oh, that sounds really good. So I left there, went back to the other guys and said, hey, look, I've been offered this thing. I really want to do it. And they're like, no, don't go. You know, whatever they're offering, we'll match you. And I'm like, but this is games. This is something I'm definitely interested in. And this is Bullfrog, and they're a big deal. And so they're like, sorry to see you go. Okay, fair enough. So I turned up at the office a couple of weeks later, sat down at the desk, and Peter comes in and he goes, what the F are you doing here? I never offered you the job.
Right. Is this classic Molyneux now?
And it's 100% classic Molyneux. He has this way of speaking that makes you think that he just says yes to everything. Because largely he just says yes to everything. And he makes you believe things that you want to believe that later on transpire to not necessarily be true. But yeah,
right.
So I then spent 6 months on the dole.
Sorry, can I just clarify? You can leave, I can shout. Can I clarify then? He basically said sod off. What are you doing here? And you just had to go out the door.
Yeah, largely, yeah. But it was in hindsight, it was my fault. There was nothing in writing, and he never actually said, I'd like to offer you the job. He was just asking how long, what my notice period would be, right?
Weasel words, but okay.
No, I honestly believe it was my fault. It was my own stupidity. Certainly that's the way my dad tells it.
Yeah. Family gatherings on a regular basis.
So I was on the dole for 6 months, and every now and again during that time, he'd call me up and say, we've got journalists coming in, would you mind coming in and playing some of the games? We want to make the office look busy, we want to, and that sort of stuff. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And after the 6 months, the guy who had the job, who was funny enough an old schoolmate of mine, he left in a hurry, decided to move to the States. And Peter was like, well, that leaves us in the lurch. You were enthusiastic. Do you still want the job?
Sorry, still want the job?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And I'm
so
like,
at this point, did you say yes, but that needs to be in writing, Peter?
Largely, yeah. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take it, definitely. And that's how I got in.
Could you just tell us what the job was? It sounds like you were play tester then, is that right?
So starting out as a play tester, level designer, everything like that. Okay. So basically, when I joined, there were 8 people, and they were all coders or artists. There were 2 artists and 6 coders. 6 coders? No, maybe fewer. No, not 6 coders. Like 4 or 5 coders, and then 1 biz dev. And so I was the sort of did everything else guy, and I'd build the levels, I'd play the game, I'd give feedback, I'd design some of the either the weapons or the abilities and that, and then.
What was the first project you started on, Alex?
So my first project there was Powermonger, and that was again, just building all the levels and testing it.
Okay.
Testing it.
Okay.
But there were let me get this right. In the first Powermonger, there were 173 levels, which sounds like a lot, but it was basically each level was because it was generated. It was working out the seed and then the placement of the towns and forests and stuff like that. So there wasn't actually that much in terms of producing that number of levels. The problem was then playing each one and going, well, that one's actually kind of fun, and this one's actually kind of fun. That was the hard part there.
That's fascinating. Now, we are amongst Amiga people. Can you tell us that we can go techie, Alex? What hardware were you just using an Amiga, or what was the setup there?
Again, now I don't want this to sound like this was indicative of what we as a company had, but my first machine, well, my first desk was a piece of wood balanced on a fish tank.
Okay.
There were 7 of us in this tiny little office above a hi-fi shop. My desk was right next to Peter, so Peter's chair would bash into the back of mine. Glenn's chair would bash into the back of Sean's, and those two would actually come to blows over this. There was just not enough room up there. And so I'm balanced on this shelf on top of a fish tank, on top of where the stairs would go underneath, quite precariously. I had an Amiga, it was a 1500? It was an Amiga 1500 with an extra 256K sellotaped onto, honestly held on with sellotape on the front, and if the desk wobbled in any way, that would thing, and the whole thing would crash, and we'd have to start all over
Hopefully
again.
not into the fish tank. I mean, I'm surprised you're still here.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, there were. Yeah, so again, one of my other responsibilities was keeping the fish fed, which.
Sorry, so there was literally fish in the fish tank?
Oh yeah.
Oh right, sorry, I thought it was an empty one.
No, actual functioning fish tank. Well, there was that fish tank there that my desk was balanced on, and then there was another fish tank a little further on, which is where we kept the piranhas.
Right. Okay. Right. That is true, is it? That is true.
Yeah.
Okay. Staggering. Can I ask you a little bit about Bullfrog? Whilst the genres that it really pioneered have become industry standards now, when you look back at it, it does seem a bit weird. It's like we're going to make a game about little men making huts, or we're going to make one about making a theme park. At the time, did you think, shouldn't we be making games about shooting aliens and stuff? I mean, did you think these kind of ideas would actually become entertaining games?
Most of it has to be blind luck, or a lot of it has to be down to blind luck. Our old adage was, we make the games that we want to play, right? And it just so happens that loads of other people wanted to play that thing too. And I think because we were doing stuff different, that really helped with the fan base. Marketing hated us for it, because we never had a Super Frog, we never had a Mario, we never had, there was nothing that they could kind of hang, there was no character that we could hang a marketing strategy on or anything, because all of our stuff would, no, these are just sort of disparate people, and that guy is no real different from that guy. He looks a bit weird, but and we don't, not necessarily we don't care about these little people, because you do, but they don't necessarily have their own identities. But every Bullfrog game started with somebody going, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, and us just kind of rolling from there. But yeah, I think definitely the sort of loads of little people wandering around that you kind of poke with a stick. A lot of it comes from Peter's sort of voyeuristic approach. Like, his whole thing was, the game shouldn't stop even when you do. Every other game, if you let go of the joystick, the main guy stops moving, and then the game just grinds to a halt. Whereas ours, you can just let go and you can sit and you can watch, and it's fascinating seeing, as long as you build the simulation as robustly as you can, it's fascinating seeing how all the different systems kind of interplay with each other, and it's still an entertainment, even if you're not necessarily 100% poking.
You said that you started off your role as a game tester, but also a level designer. When you look at games like that, they're pretty open-ended. It's not as if, find this, go through this door. I can understand how testing works in those kind of games. These were not games like that. Was the whole concept of testing quite challenging?
Well, okay, so of the people here, how many of you have played Bullfrog games?
Yes.
And keep your hands up if you think they all came out completely bug-free. There you go.
Okay.
So largely, there was a lot of emergence in these things. And that's half the fun of it, frankly, is, we never considered that if you do this, when that happens, then this other thing's going to happen. None of that was planned. That was all like, hey, that kind of works. Good. What's the next thing? And how else can we break that? Or how else can we tweak another thing and make something else fall out of that? But that's why these things were entertaining, I believe, is because, again, you get, when you discover that little quirk or that tweak or that little combination, it makes you, the player, feel special. It's like it's an alternate, dopamine hit from, Alien blew up, brilliant, I caused Alien to blow up. But this is, wait, Alien dances if other Alien stands close to it with a boombox. Hey, that's a different type of hit. But yeah,
it sounds to me, we're in an industry now that is often guided by a very clear design document. Okay, it sounds like back in those days, was there any kind of design document, or were you literally making it up as you went along?
We were in a Pizza Hut in Guildford where we came up with Syndicate.
You didn't meet Prince Andrew then?
No,
that was,
no.
It wasn't that one.
No, this is yeah. And we wrote stuff down literally on the back of a napkin. There were sketches on the back of a napkin. And then it was like, this is the seed of this thing, let's go back and what the hell are we going to do with this? Everything was, again, it was very, very emergent. It was very, wouldn't it be cool if this, that and the other. Yeah. There was almost no documentation until later on, like post the Amiga stuff. And then the only sort of paperwork there would be these bug lists of well, we need to tweak this feature, or that thing isn't working, or hey, why don't we add one of these? And then we just work our way down the list and prioritise them. And that was it. It was that sort of list of peril. I used to call them
the list of peril.
List of peril. Yeah, this is all the stuff that needs to get done to make this thing good, and it's a very amorphous thing. It's a very fluid thing, and it changes on a build by build basis. So.
Can I ask on that, because we are going to ask a bit about Peter Molyneux, of course we are, is that I once interviewed a guy called Mark Healy, who worked at Bullfrog. He went on to make his name at Media Molecule with Little Big Planet. And he said that they used to dread it when Peter Molyneux went for an interview with a magazine, because he would make stuff up that the game was supposed to do, and then he'd come back and they'd all have to make it work. Is this ringing true?
That is 100% true.
Right.
So... And bear in mind, the problem with this was back in those days, obviously, the way the information gets out was magazines. Yeah. And magazines had anything up to like a 3-month lead time. So he'd go off and he'd do this interview and think nothing of it. And then 3 months later, you'd open the magazine, you'd be reading the interview, and you'd be like, what the hell is this? It's got to be how many multiplayer? It's got to be real time. What? We can't do this. How are we going to do this? And all it was, and this is why, like up until very recently, Peter is the single best PR thing to happen to a game. It's a real double-edged sword, but the press love him. The people lap it up, and the simple reason is, whenever he's asked a question, he says yes. So whenever the journalist says, will you be able to blah, he goes, yep. and it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction now. He has no control over it. He just says yes. And so the journalist feels great because they're always asking about features that they want to see in the game. And suddenly this thing has every feature they could possibly want. That's fantastic. This is the best game ever. That's why the PR works. That's why the press for this thing was always fantastic. But then we go, none of this is technically possible. How the hell are we going to do it? And it's only because we had some of just these absolute stone cold warrior coders that we could actually pull this crap off, even like remotely, right? So it's all true, and it is just he never said no to anything.
Just last one on Peter, because this is your story. Is that, I mean, is he a genius or is he a lovable bullshitter?
No, right. So, you know when I said we make games we want to play? Yeah. All of the things started with somebody going, hey, wouldn't it be cool if let's make a game about this? And everybody in the company would buy into those games. Let's make this Powermonger game, let's make this Populist thing, let's make Syndicate. Right. The exception was Theme Park, where Peter says, I want to make a game about Theme Park. And everybody else in the office went, I don't get it. Yeah. Why are we doing that? Our last game had people with miniguns mowing down entire cities of people and everybody loved it, right? And you want to make a game about queuing? That's not cool. And
Very
it was like,
British.
theme parks are amazing. They do this. Yeah, that's great, but we don't see the game. We don't believe in this thing. And he's like, no. This thing can be huge. And so he sort of ram-raided that through and was 100% proved right.
Yeah.
That was one of, if not our most successful game that we had ever made, and kept us in business for the subsequent years, right? So on that strength, I would say he was a genius. If you put him in his element, he is going to come up with some amazing crap. How you actually achieve that stuff... He doesn't care about that.
Yeah,
that's somebody else's problem, and that's why he surrounds himself with the talented people to
Yeah.
actually action all of those things, and the detail works and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But no, big ideas guy, he's going to come up with some crazy crap stuff that you're not going to understand, but if you just do it, it'll be brilliant.
Well, that's a great testament.
Maybe he's made some missteps in recent years.
Well, yes. But anyway, let's stick to the glory days. I saw on your Moby Games page that you are known for, and I quote, your legendary game guides. Please will you tell me about that?
No, that's... There were, so again, when we're talking to the journalists about these things, and they would always be coming and say, we want to do an interview, we want to talk about such and such a project, or a good way of sort of keeping the marketing going was to produce, they would all the magazines would have hints and tips. Yeah. Peter didn't actually want to do any of that, so I did that. I was one of the only other people that he would trust to actually go and talk to journalists on my own, because I had that same enthusiasm for it, and I'd be doing, and the game does this with the stuff and the explosion and the bang and I'd get them excited about it. Because again, the very first thing he said to me was, I can teach anyone to program in 2 weeks. He says a lot of things will happen in 2 weeks. But the one thing I can't teach is enthusiasm. And so he was impressed that I would just come along and I would be effusive about these things and excited about these. And that's how you sell something to anybody, is if you're not excited about it, what right have you got to expect them to be excited about it? And so the game guides were basically me, as also the expert player in the office, because obviously I made all of the levels and played all of the levels, and not necessarily everybody else had done that, although most people had. I would be the one writing these pages, and I used to just call them the Alex Trowers Guide to whatever the game was, and off they'd go. And they would be fairly comprehensive. This sort of obviously predates the sort of the Prima guides and stuff like that. But we used to basically do our own, and it was me writing them. But
just go back.
Legendary was
Are you pushing
a bit of a
that?
stretch.
Right, yeah. Would you send those to magazines, or would they get published?
I'd send them to magazines. So the one that the one that annoyed me, funnily enough, was there was a guy called Rich Longhurst. He was a journalist for one of the PC mags, I think, and we were just finishing off Syndicate, and he would come into the office, and this was his favourite game, and he would always find an excuse to come into the office to do some interview with Peter or whatever. However, he would schedule those interviews to be at lunchtime, and it would always be, Peter's not here yet, he's gone to lunch, but we're about to fire up a game of Syndicate, because we used to just play it every lunchtime, because it was like 8-player network, and he'd be like, can I join you? And he would sit there and he would join in our sort of lunchtime games of Syndicate, just because he absolutely loved playing it. And he would be back in the office 4 or 5 times. Like every sort of 3 months, we'd see him like 4 or 5 times, but always at lunchtime, and always it just so happened that Peter was out. Do you mind if I play this? So he loved the game, and I wrote a big guide on Syndicate and all the different missions and the equipment and everything like that. He then published a book which just took all of that stuff, almost verbatim, and published a book on This is the Guide to Syndicate. So
and of course paid you for that.
No.
Oh!
So I was a bit bummed at that, but otherwise, no. Again, I love doing it. I love as I'm sure you're about to find out, I love telling people about things. So these guides, these outlets, that was a great way of me doing this. Oh, hey, did you know about this feature and that? Okay. I'm terrible with NDAs.
Okay, it's a long time ago, we're okay. You painted a picture of the early days when you joined Bullfrog of, like you say, put together with sellotape. Could you give us an idea of how things changed as some of these games, became incredibly successful?
I mean, like actual sellotape. This building is still in Guildford, by the way. The shop's called PJ Hi-Fi. It's on Bridge Street. If you come out the station, you'll walk past it on the way into town. But on the ceiling was a big crack, and we put a 2p in the crack, and we said if the 2p ever falls out, we have to move. So, but yeah, it was real kind of bootstrapped stuff, definitely. definitely. Certainly in the early days. But then after that we moved to the research park and it all got a bit fancier then. We had things like air conditioning and
how spoiled. Did it change the creative atmosphere, the fact that it was in a more professional office?
No. And I take umbrage at your use of the term professional.
Sorry, I'm totally sorry. I withdraw professional immediately.
Right, so somebody asked me recently, was Bullfrog toxic?
Really?
Again, in the current climate, obviously this word gets used a lot. And I was like, no, of course not, don't be silly. And then I thought about it a little bit more and went, oh, wait, you couldn't do that now. And, oh, no, that. No, you probably shouldn't have done that.
Oh, come on, you need to tell us some of the that and that.
Right, okay, so some of it is there's just stuff that you don't do in offices anymore. But again, from what I've seen, and I think I saw Mike Daly post a thing on Twitter recently about uni rally and unicycles in the office, and that I had learnt to unicycle in the office. Probably can't.
Good life skills.
And we learnt to skateboard in the office. We learnt to juggle in the office. Nerf guns, laser tag. BB guns, got into BB guns in a big way at one point, and one of our, I wouldn't say favourite games is, we always, again this is going to sound really, really bad, but we always maintain a good relationship with the local school kids.
Okay, where's this going? Right.
So basically, getting in work experience people.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of the local schools would be like, we need to send out a bunch of kids. Can you take any? We'd be like, yes, sure, bring them on. Fresh meat. This is fantastic. And again, they were really enthusiastic to be there. They loved the idea of testing these games. Again, they just see it as, oh, I'm going to play games for a living. It's a little more than that. But still, it was a fun week. As part of the work experience thing, we weren't allowed to pay them, and Peter always thought this was a little bit off. So, what we invented was that he would do a quiz for them, and every time they got a question right, we would double the money. So it would start the first question for a quid, and then we'd double it up, double it up, double it up, all the way through, right? And if they got a question wrong, that was it, or they could have one more chance to double it up. Finally, but to do so they had to play Game Tester Space Invaders.
Okay.
So what Game Tester Space Invaders was, they would stand up against the far wall, we would stand there with our BB guns, and they would have to shuffle along to the far side of the wall and back again while we shot them.
Right. So toxicity, shooting children does seem quite high up there.
I'm no legal expert. I'm willing to bet that you probably can't do that now. I'm willing to bet that you probably shouldn't have done it then. But it's that kind of, I don't know, we were all lads. It was all entirely male dominated, and it was always in good fun, but we did shoot one of them in the eye, and it was a shame because he was a really good tester.
Could only do 2D games after that. Is that right? Right.
Yeah, I have no idea what happened to him after that, but he was a lovely kid.
Right. Can we ask you specifically about some of the actual individual games you worked? Let's start with Powermonger. Okay. What was it difficult? I mean, trying to make a game basically around being God. How do you start with that?
Well, the hard parts about Powermonger were obviously coming on the back of Populist. Everyone just assumed it was a sequel to Populist. No, it's a completely different game. It was one of the first RTSs with a weird and clunky interface, but but it all came about because Peter wanted to simulate a world. So each of the individual units in Powermonger was a little person, and they had a house, and they had a partner, and they had a job, and they would just do those things, and everything would just work. And so it was the first kind of proper simulator of that aspect. And then you would come in and poke it with your stick, where your stick was this general who would recruit them in the army and go and send them off to war, so that was where the interest came there. It was just, here's this background simulation that's running, and it's insanely detailed, some of the stuff in there. And then you just get to poke it with a big sword, and away we go. So the hardest part, the two hard parts with Powermonger were distancing ourselves from it's not a popular sequel, and actually explaining to people what it was, because there wasn't really a game like that. I mean, people say Megalomania was kind of close, but it was the same. I don't know which one came out first. I think we may have beaten them to market slightly, and I think theirs was more accessible and more immediate. There was less of a simulation there, and it was more, let me amass all my guys and go and let's watch them fight those other guys. Whereas ours had much more logistics in terms of food supply and transport time and the stupid carrier pigeons and stuff like that. But yeah, so it was a very... It's very interesting when you're sort of first to market in that new space, because people are like, I don't know what to make of this yet. There's nothing I can compare it to.
Can I just ask you, because you said Powermonger was the first game you worked on. You'd mentioned before about you couldn't believe there would be a job making games. You know, when you saw Powermonger on the shelves in it, was there a game store in Guildford? I mean, was that a really big thing for you?
It was a huge thing, and it still is to this day. Now, any of you devs, there is no better feeling than walking into a game shop and seeing your thing on the shelf. Then some kid comes up and takes it off the shelf and goes to his mate, get this, it's really good. And I'm tingling now with that, right? And so launch day was, it was our traditional thing that we would go into the local game stores in town, and we would kind of stand there at the front of the shop, and we were rearranging the shelves to put our game in the prominent position. We're like, hey, this is great. And I maintain that there's no better feeling in this industry than that. To the extent that my missus, who's in the other room right now, she was working at Dam Busters, and they just released Dead Island 2. And so we had the pilgrimage to the game shop in town. I said, look, we've got to do this. The box copy on shelf, and not only was it her game on the shelf, but her artwork on the standee. They'd made plushies of the stuff that she'd made, and she's just standing there with this huge grin on her face like, this is it, right? And that feeling is, let me tell you, it's the best in the world. It's amazing.
That's beautiful. Let's ask about another one of your game. You worked on Populist II. Working on any sequel can be a double-edged sword, because it's like, do we do something so it's different, but we don't want to go too far from what made the game popular in the first place. Looking back at Populist II, do you think you did a good job?
Yes, and at the same time, no. So, Populist II was more efficient. It enabled us to do more things. We had fewer restrictions. Like the original Populist, there would only ever be one person on any one tile. So when you see them fighting, that's a weird kludge that we had to kind of shoehorn in, but we had no such restrictions in Populist 2, so you'd have loads of people all fighting at the same time. We wanted more effects, and we made more effects, and we made so many effects that we maybe made too many effects. So that's probably a bit of a misstep. The idea, it became a little too overwhelming. We lost something in the purity of the original. I think Populist 2 is a better game. I don't think it has the purity or the cleanliness of the first one. And the fact that we'd moved away from the sort of the abstract, they were just like weird little cave people, and we'd actually kind of started theming them. So even though we had like a proper graphic artist doing all of the art, because the original the artwork was all done by Glenn, and he's a coder. But so even though we had proper graphic artists doing this stuff, I don't think it necessarily caught people in quite the same way as the first one did. There was less left to the imagination. And so, for instance, if you look at something like Syndicate, one of the reasons that works is because you've got this layer of abstraction. You're so far away from them that you're imagining the other stuff that's happening to them, and it's not held up in not necessarily like, oh, we can see the animation of them actually doing the thing, but I'm thinking that it is, and it's always going to be much better in my head. And so I think that's a problem we had with Populist 2. We showed more than we necessarily needed to.
Can I ask, do you realise things are wrong with a game at the time, or is it only when it's out and you go, oh, is it just that you're too close to it when you're actually making it?
Yeah, almost never. It's very, very hard to be objective about the thing that you're working on. Which is why stuff like these external testers that we would bring in, or in modern parlance, you use focus tests. You get these focus groups, and they come in and they play the game, and they tell you the stuff that you don't want to hear, and that is so important. I firmly believe in the sort of the two-faced school of game development, and that is externally, you've got to be, our game is the best game ever. It's got this and it's got that, it's got the other, the stuff and the thing and the bang, and you're going to love it. And there's no game better than ours. If you do that internally, your game is going to be rubbish. You cannot delude yourself like that. You've got to have a team together where you can go to anyone on the team and say, this thing that we've done isn't good enough. How can we make it better? Look at this other thing. They do it so much better than us. What can we take from that? Or how can we improve this thing? This isn't up to standard. And everybody on the team has to be okay with that level of brutal honesty. And that is firmly how I believe you make the really good stuff. So again, one of the hardest things is when you do get these focus tests and somebody is there and they're playing it wrong, you're not allowed to say anything. You can't interrupt them because you've got to see how they get it wrong and why they're getting it wrong. And you've got to let them get it wrong so that you then know that was wrong and everybody seems to be doing that. There's something we need to fix, right? It's not they're playing it wrong, it's you haven't told them how to play it right.
Yeah. Or actually, can we pick up that theme that I'd say let's talk about Syndicate. Part of the charm of Syndicate is that you can approach things in your own way. So hang on, isn't partly giving the player choice something that was key at Bullfrog?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The problem then comes when it becomes a sort of a shelf moment for them, a barrier to entry.
Right. Okay.
Basically, like my core sort of principle with most game design is if it looks like you can do a thing, you should be allowed to do a thing, right? Let's not put a door on a wall that isn't a door. If you're going to do that, make it a wall or make it a boarded up door or something like that. But if it looks like a door, it should function like a door. So I'm moving this guy around, and if it looks like I can get in the car, I should be able to get in the car. Otherwise, there needs to be a bloody good reason why I can't do that thing. If I want to shoot that guy, well, does it look like I can shoot him? You should be able to shoot him. Do you see what I mean? So it's that sort of level of freedom and that level of sort of player ownership. Then the fun part comes with what are the ramifications of that happening, and does it matter to the actual mission itself? And sometimes it can and sometimes it can't, and that's great. If people can solve this mission by going in and shooting one guy, mission done, brilliant. If people can solve it by not shooting any guys, excellent, that's fantastic. If people can solve it by shooting every guy, that's also cool. And I would hate to constrain a mission to you have to do it this particular way. So something like, I mean, I think one of the best examples of this would be something like Deus Ex, for example, where there's always, you know, you can go in all guns blazing, you can go in hiding behind every crate, you can try and climb the outside of the thing, you can do whatever you want, and there is always a sort of a valid solution to it. And the only way you do that, which is kind of how we built all of our games, was it's mechanics first. This is the way the world works, and we build that as robust as you can, and then let people play it however they want.
You mentioned that Syndicate was a favourite in the office. Would you like to tell us how many hours do you think was lost to those network play sessions?
Well, it depends on what you define as lost. A, they were all really, really valuable things, but B, they normally happened after outside hours. Right. So what we used to do was Friday night, everybody goes down the pub, have a few drinks, meet up with our friends, and then 11 o'clock, pub's finished, we'd come back to the office with our friends. This is like me and Sean and some buddies of ours from school, or what have you. We'd come back to the office, we'd go, right, let's have a game. We'd play a game of Syndicate, and then people would go, wouldn't it be cool if this, or wouldn't it be cool if that, or what if we just tweak this? And then Sean would make a new version, I'd build a new level, 15 minutes later, hey, let's try this one. And we'd do that, and we'd do that, and we'd do that. And then somebody would look up and realise that it was light again outside, and in fact it was Sunday morning now, and we'd spent the whole weekend just playing this. And that's how we made it. And it wasn't crunch, because it was something we would choose. Nobody was saying you have to do this. We were choosing to do it. We were young, we had no social life, and we just really enjoyed playing this game. So that's why you can tell that these sort of games were a real sort of labour of love. And the one that always got me about this is exactly how the Gauss gun got into Syndicate. It was one of these Friday sessions, one of these weekenders, and Sean has made an explosion, and he's like, what are we going to do with this? And I said, well, look, we've got this other gun. The Gauss gun was originally supposed to be like an electromagnetic gun, so it would only work on cyborgs. But we'd never got round to implementing that bit. So it was like, well, let's just put this thing, we'll make a rocket launcher and we'll put it in that slot. We never intended to have a rocket launcher in the game. And we've made this thing and we fired it and we went, oh, that looks cool. Oh, we like that. And we didn't tell anyone. And we didn't tell anyone until the Monday lunchtime comes around and we fire up the session, and obviously no one buys the Gauss gun, because up until this point it hasn't done anything except for me and Sean. And we're buying up our entire squad of Gauss guns. We get 5 minutes into the game and everybody else is moving their squads around, and then suddenly this explosive death is raining down and they're like, what the fuck is this? Where did this go? And then we had to explain, oh, we've put something in, it's on this button here. Start again, I want to buy it. And that was it. And we were off to the races then. And that's how you knew you had something special. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? But that only came about because of the extra hours that we were wasting on playing the game.
Let's just ask that. I mean, you said you had no social life, but as you were telling that, you were massive smile on your face, as indeed all the stories you've told about Bullfrog, you've told with a smile. So I presume work was your social life.
Yeah, so, and again, when we moved to these professional offices, we had like a big chill out room, and there was a pool table and arcade machines and Sky Sports, and it would become the social hub of our thing. We would go and spend the weekend there because that's where all our mates were going, and you know, we'd watch the TV, and we'd go play LAN games, and we'd play a bit of pool, or we would just hang out there because we knew that's where our friends would be. So the point where you kind of lose me in this era is the point where HR or facilities have started saying, hang on, we can't have external people coming into the office, everybody's got to be NDA'd up, and immediately prior to that it was unprofessional but a lot more fun, but now suddenly they're worried about people stealing our ideas. We weren't worried about that. Or they're worried about people nicking stuff from the office. Okay, maybe. And it became a lot more corporate, and it became a lot more
serious. They were worried about you shooting children again. Is that?
I'm not sure they were ever worried about it, because I don't think we ever told them that's something we did.
That's good. Can I just ask you then, do you think that makes better games? The fact that you essentially sound like you lived there. Did that make a better game? Or, I mean, try and be honest about this. The fact that there isn't any divide between work and, you know, a home, a real life, maybe that doesn't always make the best game.
Well, again, right, so for context, we were all teenagers, early, mid-20s, something like that. So nobody had family. Right, and that was also a big sort of clincher with something. People would decide to go home because they wanted to spend time with their kids, and I never got that.
Yeah, right.
100%, I get that now. Okay, it makes perfect sense. But yeah, better games. I think they were more fun, and again, you could tell the attention to detail. You could tell the labour of love. The problem is, from a purely practical standpoint, is they took too long. And they were impossible to plan for. Right. So that's why, like we never released a game on time. We certainly never did that. It was always slipping, always. It would always be late. And again, you know, when you're dealing with publishers who are funding this thing, they don't like that for some strange reason. You know, the fact that they cannot actually plan out their financials for the year or what have you was a real bone of contention for them. And let me say now, perfectly justified. I think, you know, that was a big problem. So we never found that balance between wild creativity and actual pragmatic production.
That's fascinating, and that's a hard balance to make. Of course, we've talked about the glory days, but there was a split between Bullfrog producing for the Amiga. Can you just tell us why did that happen?
No, so the only reason we moved away from the Amiga, and it was Syndicate that did this, is because the stuff we wanted to do in Syndicate, the poor old Amiga just wasn't powerful enough to do it. Things had kind of moved on then. Like, prior to that, everything we'd done on the Amiga was all 68000 assembler, and it worked quite well. But then, because we wanted to do this, the thing that kind of really enticed us was this idea of it all being on a LAN. And the Amiga couldn't necessarily do that, whereas these PCs were, we could have 8 people playing this thing, which we thought, this is amazing, right? But then the PCs were more powerful, and the level of detail we wanted in the world was far more than the Amiga could handle. The transition to the PC, though, wasn't instant, and so, for example, there was still, when I was building the levels, I was having to use the editor we had in the Amiga to piece together the buildings to then put together on the PC, and that meant that I was having to make these sort of weird building blocks in this very constrained Amiga view. Like, the Amiga view could only show me like 8x8 tiles at any one time, and so a lot of the buildings were way bigger than that, so I was having to make these little pieces and then combine them later on the PC. But it was the Amiga that had the block placement tool that we were using at the time. So it hung in there for quite a while, but the poor little thing just couldn't handle what it is that we wanted to do. And you could never do something like a magic carpet on the Amiga at the time.
Okay. Let's finish with a question about the Amiga. You have gone on to work on many, many platforms, on many, many games. And bearing in mind who our audience is, Alex, where would you say the Amiga fits in your career and kind of maybe even your sort of fondness levels?
I think that's a leading question.
It's a massively leading question. Have you seen them? There's
Yeah,
more of them than us.
No. In all honesty, I absolutely loved the Amiga. If you ever get Glenn to do this, he will say ST, and then you can obviously stone him. That's absolutely fine. I loved the Amiga. I have a lot of time for it, and again, just wandering through that room back there and seeing like your Lotus Challenge, and I'm just like, oh yeah, no. This was a good time. And so when I didn't get the job, and I kind of went home, tail between my legs to my dad. At that point, I only had a Spectrum, and Dad was like, well, why don't we get one of these Amigas then? And really? In that downtime, we picked up an Amiga. I was playing like F-29 and Cyberball and Dragon's Breath. Oh, I loved that. And me, my dad, and my brother, we'd play these games together, and it was fantastic. Or the evenings we'd have playing like Bomberman around it, and again getting all the schoolmates to come over and like let's have a 5-player game of Bomberman. It was fantastic. So in terms of that strong pang of nostalgia and the good times I had with it, Amiga, 100%.
And on that note, thank you so much, Alex Trowers. That was brilliant. Well done. Okay, we have got about 10 minutes, so if anyone would like to ask Alex about his time in Amiga, but can I say he's had a far bigger career than that, then please indicate by sticking your hand in the air. They're a quiet bunch, aren't they?
Cowards.
Hooray!
Go on, Taz.
Was there a bullfrog in the office?
Was there a bullfrog in the office?
Was there an actual bullfrog?
There was a statue of a frog, a little statue of a frog. And at the point where we changed the logo over from the original kind of round one to the more geometric one, then that appeared on everything. There's a bullfrog rug, there were, and it was on all the T-shirts and posters, and it appeared around the office a lot. But that only happened because we'd always look at the Bitmap brothers, who were like the rock stars, and we're like, oh, their stuff's really cool, man. Why isn't our stuff cool? Our thing's just a frog. And so that's when we had the redesign of the logo to try and basically copy them.
There you go. Thank you so much, okay? Come on, someone's asked a question now. It's okay. Yeah.
What's your favourite game of all time?
Favourite game of all time? Again, that's a stupid question. Because there are so many.
What are they not asking?
Favourite game of all time is probably Dark Souls, just in terms of the amount of time I will spend talking about Dark Souls, or Elite Dangerous. I love all of that. Favourite Amiga game would the one actually. Let me change your question. The question that I used to get asked was if there was an Amiga game, or at the time it was just a game, that you wish you'd made, what was it? And my answer to that was always Lemmings.
Yeah. That's a good call. Maybe one more question? Yay, thank you. Oh, I'll take two and then we're done. At the back and then...
Not so much a question, but I will take this moment to thank you for Syndicate. For me and my brother, I think we had 2 years glued together in front of that game.
Oh,
Well, thank you very much.
hey!
Well, don't forget, it's not just me. There was quite a big team.
Behalf.
Although, if anybody ever, the other one that I normally get is, oh yeah, Syndicate, yeah, I really like that. Did you make the Atlantic Accelerator? And yeah, that one was mine. Yeah. Yeah. There we go.
Well, there you go. That was right. And one last question here, my friend.
You talked about bugs in some of your games. Now, call me pedantic. Theme Hospital was one of my favourite games, as a teenager. The one thing that always annoyed me was the Kit Kat vending machine was a drinks machine. Was that deliberate, or was that a...
So Theme Hospital, and again, of all the Bullfrog games, that's the one that stands out the most today. In terms of, you can install it and play it now, and it is as good as it has ever been. I think that's one of the best games that we ever made. The Kit Kat vending machine thing was we were just experimenting with product placement at the time, and we had a deal with Midland for Theme Park. Midland Bank, or HSBC as they are now, I guess. And then, so no, it was just, we were told to put KitKat logos on the vending machines, and it's just some of them ended up being drinks machines. So I don't think it was intentional, but I don't think anyone really looked into it that deeply. But somebody paid us money to put KitKat logos on them, so we put KitKat logos on them.
Okay. Right, can I just say, that was absolutely fantastic. Just a few bits before we go is that I'd just like to say, I don't know if we've done it already, but can we have a massive round of applause for Ravi Abbott, who's basically put this stuff on. So he's there at the back. Hey! That's probably a non-alcoholic drink you've got there, Ravi. Ravi, it's been a pleasure being your designated driver. I was talking to Ravi earlier. The attendance here has been incredible. I can also say, well, on a Sunday, having been to weekend events, sometimes the second day, everyone's hungover. Not like that at all. What an amazing atmosphere. And I personally really, really hope this is an annual event. We have one kind of last thing to do, is that the raffle will be drawn at 3 o'clock. So please purchase your tickets. There's some fantastic prizes at the back. Thank you so much. My name's Paul Drury. I write for Retro Gamer. Thank you so much for having me. But let's finish with a huge round of applause for Alex Trowers.